I was 27 years old when the night that defined me took place, though now, sitting here at 63, I still feel the same chill race down my spine whenever I recall it. Age hasn't dulled that memory. It's etched into me like a scar. People often say your family is your safe place, your anchor when the world feels uncertain. That's what I believed too, perhaps naively. I believed it right up until the evening when my own family laughed at me across a table, assuming I was nothing more than a dreamer, a failure who hadn't found her footing. But here's the truth. At that very moment, I had a secret worth millions. You see, back then, I was the odd one out in our family. My brother Thomas had taken over Dad's auto shop in Omaha. My sister Linda was raising 3 children with her husband, and my parents adored her for giving them the gift of grandchildren. Me, I was the daughter who had dropped out of college, who rented a rundown apartment in Tulsa, and who, according to my family, had wasted her potential on internet nonsense. But they didn't know. They didn't know that for 6 years I had been building something the world wasn't yet ready to understand. So let me ask you, have you ever carried a truth so heavy, so enormous, that you couldn't share it even with the people you loved most? Have you ever sat at a dinner table while everyone underestimated you, while in your pocket lay proof that you had outgrown every box they'd ever placed you in? That was me at 27, and it nearly broke me to keep it inside. The loop of my story begins even earlier in my childhood. My father used to tell me I had boyish hobbies. He wanted me to play piano like Linda, to dress in bright skirts and learn to cook. Instead, I spent my evenings in the garage, fiddling with the family's old computer, pulling out wires and trying to understand the code behind the simplest programs. He'd shake his head and mutter, "This won't get you anywhere, Ellie." I hated disappointing him, but I couldn't help myself. The machine spoke to me in a way people rarely did. By the time I was in college, I was different from my peers. They went to frat parties, fell in and out of love, travelled during spring break. I stayed in my dorm room, fingers blistered from typing, eyes red from lack of sleep. I wasn't building for fun. I was building because I saw something, a future no one else believed in, a system that would one day redefine trust, security, and freedom. But when I dropped out during my junior year, my family treated it like a funeral. "You're throwing away your life," Mom cried. Dad refused to look at me. I remember standing in that kitchen, suitcase in hand, as Thomas patted me on the back with forced sympathy and said, "Good luck, sis. You'll need it." For 6 years after that, luck had nothing to do with it. There was nothing glamorous about the life I lived. Ramen noodles, thrift store furniture, no health insurance. I coded until dawn, only to delete entire scripts by noon because they weren't right. Friends stopped inviting me out. Boyfriends didn't last longer than a month. My world shrank to 4 walls and a glowing screen. But my conviction never wavered. And then the emails started. Small firms asking if I'd consider selling. At first, it was laughable. 3 million, 5 million, 8. Numbers that would have made my family faint, yet I knew they didn't reflect the value of what I'd built, so I turned them all down. Until one day, a European investment group flew to Tulsa just to meet me. They sat in my cramped apartment, 5 men in sharp suits who looked wildly out of place among the stacks of energy drink cans and sticky notes taped to the walls. Their final offer, $27.5 million, plus a 2-year consulting contract. I signed the papers with trembling hands. 2 days later, I was at that family barbecue. The smell of grilled corn hung in the air, kids chased each other across the yard, and laughter echoed off the wooden fence. My father raised a beer bottle toward Thomas, bragging about how steady and reliable his son was. Then he turned to me, smirk tugging at his lips. "Ellie, you still doing that internet thing? You know, Derek's dealership is hiring. Might be time to get a real job." The table erupted in laughter. I forced a smile, but inside my heart thundered. In my purse lay a contract that made me worth more than everyone at that table combined, yet they saw me as nothing, invisible. Here's the connection point. In that moment, I realized something that has shaped the rest of my life. Success isn't about who recognizes you. It's about who you become in the silence when no one is watching. I could have thrown the truth in their faces. I could have told them about the millions, about the men in suits who had begged for my signature. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, nodding, swallowing the burn of humiliation, while secretly holding the knowledge that my life had already changed. The suspense didn't wait for years to arrive. It began that very night. Because when you hold a secret like that, when you live among people who think you're nothing while you're holding everything, you start to wonder, how long can I hide it? How long before the truth rips through the fabric of the life you've stitched so carefully? That question haunted me then, and in a way, it still haunts me now. The morning after that barbecue, I woke up in my apartment, sunlight streaming through the blinds onto a stack of legal papers. I remember sitting up in bed, the surreal weight of it all pressing against my chest. 27 years old, and suddenly I had more money than I could have imagined in my wildest dreams. And yet, I felt oddly hollow. What was I supposed to do with it? Buy a mansion? Drive a luxury car down Main Street just to watch my father's face twist in disbelief? The thought flickered in my mind, I won't lie. But deeper down, I knew that wasn't me. Flash never interested me. What I craved wasn't revenge. It was respect. But respect bought with bragging is shallow, isn't it? So I made a choice that day. I wouldn't tell them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I would live simply, and instead of parading my success, I would use it quietly, silently, to lift the people I loved in ways they couldn't trace back to me. That decision shaped the next decade of my life. The loop of secrecy was harder than I imagined. I kept my same dingy apartment and drove my same old Honda. I still clipped coupons when I went to the grocery store, because if I suddenly changed overnight, suspicions would rise. But behind the scenes, I was building a quiet empire of giving. My niece, Rachel, Linda's oldest, needed braces. They were too expensive for her family, and Linda cried to me one evening on the phone about how guilty she felt. 2 months later, an anonymous school scholarship appeared, covering every dime. Linda wept again, this time with relief, never once guessing her sister had orchestrated it. My father needed surgery on his knee after decades of working at the shop. Insurance wouldn't cover it fully. A local foundation, one I had created under a different name, stepped in to cover the balance. I'll never forget sitting at the hospital, watching him shake his head in wonder, muttering about good people in the world. He never thought it was me. Even the family farm, weighed down by taxes, was saved at the last second by a mysterious benefactor. Thomas boasted at the next holiday dinner about how lucky they'd been. My mother crossed herself and said, "God always provides." I just smiled and passed the mashed potatoes. But here's where the suspense began to build. Not all secrets can stay hidden forever. By the time I turned 35, whispers had started. My family began to speculate about the mysterious donor who seemed to have a soft spot for us. At Christmas, Dad leaned across the table and said, "Ellie, maybe you should apply for help too. Whoever this angel is, they seem to like folks around here." The irony nearly made me choke on my cider. And then came the moment I didn't expect, the moment the truth began to slip through the cracks. It was Emma's middle school career day. Linda begged me to come speak since, "You work on computers, don't you, Ellie? The kids could use some inspiration." I laughed nervously, but I agreed. Standing in that gymnasium, staring at rows of wide-eyed 12-year-olds, something inside me shifted. I told them how I had dropped out of college, how everyone thought I was throwing away my future, how I lived on ramen and spent years being laughed at. Their parents leaned forward, curious. My family members sat in the back, arms crossed, waiting for me to embarrass myself. And then
I said it. I told them that 6 months earlier I had sold the protocol I built for $27.5 million. The gym fell silent, dead silent. I'll never forge you.
At the look on my father's face, his mouth hung open, his beer belly rising and falling with each stunned breath. My mother pressed a hand to her lips, tears welling in her eyes. Linda gasped audibly, her cheeks flushed. For the first time in my life, their eyes weren't filled with pity. They were filled with something else, shock, awe, and maybe even pride. But here's the catch. With that single confession, everything I had kept balanced for years began to wobble. After the event, whispers spread through the family. Suddenly, I wasn't Ellie the disappointment anymore. I was Ellie with the millions. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called me out of the blue. An uncle who had once dismissed me with a wave now hinted about business opportunities. And my brother Thomas, the one who'd always been Dad's favourite, started looking at me differently, like I was no longer the younger sister he could pat on the head, but a rival he couldn't quite measure up to. That was when I realised something chilling. Success doesn't just change how strangers treat you, it changes family too, and not always for the better. I was 35 years old, and for the first time I wondered, had I made a mistake by telling the truth? After that day in the school gymnasium, nothing was ever the same. For years I had been invisible at family gatherings, the odd one out, the sister who never quite measured up. Now, suddenly, I was the centre of every conversation. It wasn't admiration I felt at first, it was scrutiny. At dinners, Thomas asked me pointed questions about my finances, questions he never would have dared before. Linda began bringing me articles about charities she thought I might like to support. My mother, God bless her, tried to understand, asking me what exactly I had sold and if it was like owning a piece of land. And my father, the man who once smirked at my so-called wasted potential, would fall quiet whenever I spoke, as if re-evaluating every memory he had of me. At first, I thought maybe this was the respect I had always wanted. But respect, I learned, isn't always pure. Sometimes it's laced with envy, fear, and resentment. The loop of my secrecy had ended, but a new loop of tension began. I started noticing changes in Thomas. He had always been proud of running Dad's auto shop, the golden child who carried the family trade forward. But now, every time we gathered, I could feel the bitterness radiating from him. One evening he muttered under his breath, "Money doesn't make you better, Ellie." I wanted to snap back, "No, but belittling me never made you better either." Instead, I bit my tongue. Linda, on the other hand, grew closer. She told me one night, after too much wine, that she'd always admired me, even when she pretended not to. "You had guts," she whispered. "I followed the rules, but you carved your own." That meant more to me than she'll ever know. But the real suspense came with what happened 2 years later. A letter arrived in the mail, an anonymous note, no signature, no return address. Just a single sentence written in blocky handwriting. Secrets never stay buried forever. My blood ran cold. I read it over and over, heart pounding. Was it a threat, a warning? Had someone discovered the anonymous trusts, the hidden donations, the quiet ways I had funneled my wealth into helping my family, or was it someone from the outside, a stranger who had pieced things together? I never found out who sent it, but from that day forward I realized the truth. Money might buy freedom, but it also paints a target on your back. Still, I pressed on. I invested wisely, quietly. I lived modestly, never flashing wealth, and I used my resources to make sure my family never fell too far. Emma, inspired by my story, grew into a brilliant young woman. She studied computer science, just like I once did, but with far more support than I had. When she got her first job as a software engineer, she called me crying, saying, "Aunt Ellie, I wouldn't be here without you." That moment was worth more than all the millions combined.
Over time, my father softened. One Christmas, years after the barbecue where he laughed at me, he pulled me aside. His hands trembled, his voice unsteady. "I didn't understand back then," he admitted. "But I'm proud of you, Ellie, more than you'll ever know." Those words, late as they were, healed something in me I didn't realize had been bleeding all those years. And yet, even now, as I sit here at 63, I still carry that letter in a locked drawer. Sometimes I take it out, run my fingers over the worn paper, and wonder who sent it. A jealous relative, a business rival, or maybe just someone who wanted to remind me that no matter how carefully you build your life, shadows always find a way in. That's the suspense of my story, the uncertainty that lingers, the reminder that victory is never as secure as it seems. But here's my statement, the truth I've come to hold on to after decades of living this double life. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right again and again, even when no one believes in you. Respect isn't handed to you. It's carved from the stone of persistence. And family will laugh at you, doubt you, envy you, and sometimes even betray you. But they can also surprise you, heal you, and love you in ways money never can. I was 27 when they laughed at me. 63 now, I'm the one still standing, not because of the millions, but because I never stopped. And that, I suppose, is the legacy I'll leave behind.